Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Legal Weekly Wine, where we discuss the week's hottest legal topics. We are on fire. This week, it is hard to get away from politics, but we are going to do our best to talk about how politics relate to the law, and it all goes back to our fundamental document, the Constitution. So we are calling today's special the Constitutional Law Special, where we are going to go back with everything that we talk about to the fundamentals that our founders put into place, what the Constitution says about it, if anything, what the constitutional principles are on how to deal with each and everything that's coming upon us is probably the best way to put it. And we're going to try to be as neutral as possible. We apologize when our own opinions get in the way, but what we do try to do is give you the legal principles that will help guide your own thoughts and opinions on the matter and hopefully continue with our wonderful democratic republic. All right, so I'm Virginia Tarani. I'm with Tarani Law LLC because you never need a lawyer till you do. I'm also the co-founder and the CEO of The Law Unscripted, which is the program that hosts the Weekly Wine. We also provide bar classes and law school review classes of the 8 core subjects, including constitutional law. So if you want some extra insight on that, please go to thelawunscripted.com. Check out our programs. We have everything from a simple subject outline all the way to full classes on all of the 8 core subjects. We also have merchandise. So I'm excited about us getting our new shirts. But check out our merchandise page. We've got some pretty funny quotes on shirts. We're getting some mugs. Check that out. See what we may have available for you. My lovely co-host, as well as the other attorney at Tarani Law and the co-host of The Law Unscripted, including this podcast, is Chelsea Rogers. Welcome.
Hi, glad to be here. We have so much to talk about as usual, but this week, y'all.
Yeah, this week, and I should have announced it, I'm so excited, not in a great way, but so amped up about what's happening. I forgot to even mention what we have going on this week. So we have the attempted assassination of former President Donald Trump, who is the Republican nominee for this election. We have Judge Aileen Cannon dismissing Trump's federal document case in Florida. We're going to tie that back in with the new privileged immunity, presidential immunity case out of the Supreme Court that just came down a few weeks ago, especially Justice Thomas's decision and his writing in the concurring opinion. We are also going to talk about the Republican convention. That has happened all of this week that we're speaking. We might air this next week, but we're going to talk about the Republican convention. We're going to talk about the vice presidential pick that Trump has had and what happens if something happens to Trump. We've done some episodes of, based on the Constitution, what happens if Biden steps down and steps out of the race. But what we haven't discussed is what happens if something happens to Trump and any of that. So we're going to talk about all of that. We have so much going on. And to help us sift through all of this is our expert in political science, an expert in the Constitution, the amending process, and constitutional law. We have our co-host, Dr. John Weil, the Dean of the Honors College for Middle Tennessee State University. Welcome back.
Good to be here.
I hope that you are able to take the lead a lot today. I am trying.
Hulk Hogan.
Yes.
Yeah, and Kid Rock, of course. Who would know more about either of them than I would? Yes.
I don't know. And I mean, I'm waiting for you to rip open your shirt to display. Are we not having that here today?
We're not going to do that here today. Sorry.
Is this hopeful. A shirts on program? Hold on.
Hilarious. Yeah. I think next time we need to all have a rip off our shirts and display, John Weil for president. I think is what we need to do. That's what we've come to. So yes, very, very exciting times, and not necessarily in the best of ways. So don't take this nervous laughter as I'm excited as this is going on. But truly, I return to our continuing comment this whole time, this season, especially this summer, of we are living in historic times. And what is the old, is it the Chinese proverb of may
Those
you
be
live?
interesting times.
May
As
you
a
live in
curse.
interesting times.
Yeah, may you live in interesting times.
So I feel that curse is upon us. But as a legal scholar, as someone who majored in political science, as someone who has continued to study in constitutional law, who has dedicated my own life to the law and the practice of law, this is interesting times. So let's start. I think we need, let's address the assassination attempt. I think that is the biggest news, the most alarming news that has occurred in the last week. We are thankful that at least former President Trump is safe. We express our sympathies and our deep sympathies and for the loss of the firefighter. I believe he was a fire chief. Is that correct?
That's right.
The fire chief who did lose his life in this assassination attempt, and the others who were injured. So we do want to say that we extend our sympathies to those families. Loss of life is never something that we want, that we advocate for, that we expect, and that we should expect in this country. And for that, we wanted to start there. I do appreciate all of the calls on both sides since this attempt for more unity, less division, because I agree that especially the politics, has seemed much more divisive than any other time in my lifetime. But Dr. Vial, what I want to do is bring this to you. And I want to outline a couple of thoughts that I have as far as what I'd love for you to address, especially being the political science and constitutional expert that you are. I want to find out, one, during your lifetime, and I know I'm sort of giving away part of your age, but during your lifetime, I know that there was the assassination attempt on Ronald Reagan.
Oh, I was afraid you were going to say Lincoln. Okay. Lincoln, Garfield, McKinley. I remember them all.
You can choose which one to discuss.
Okay.
But at least in your own memory, I know I was little when it happened, so I don't remember much about it, but I know it happened during your lifetime. Kennedy assassination happened during your lifetime. And I know you're much more aware of the prior presidential assassinations, like you're listing off. I couldn't have even remembered at least one or two of those names. So with your expertise, I'd love for you to talk about, in American politics, how those have impacted us before, and especially with regard to the failed assassination attempt most recently for Ronald Reagan and any similarities you see here. I'd then love for you, and I know this is kind of a 2 or 3-parter, so maybe you're writing it down, but I'd love for you then to tell us how you see the race, the election, impacted now. So we've got the attempt overall, the political implications. I'd love for you to give us an analysis of what you think it does for this presidential race. And then anything of what does happen if something happens to Trump. We've got the 25th Amendment if he were in office. That seems easy.
If he were elected, it also covers that.
So that's what I also want to, so let's take that up. So what happens before, if he's not elected, and then what happens if he is elected but not yet inaugurated?
Okay.
So I'd love for you to discuss that for us, and we'll chime in. Maybe.
So
Virginia, what are you drinking? What is everybody drinking?
Yes.
Oh.
Thank you. Thank you for that call out, Chelsea, because yes, we are drinking. Happy hour to everyone. Dr. Vial's staying up and alert with his Pepsi from the Middle Tennessee campus, Pepsi products. Chelsea, what are you drinking?
I'm back to my boring Moscato boxed wine. And look at that heavy pour, guys. That is I just looked at it and was like, oh my goodness.
I hope you were not going out afterwards.
I will not be.
We do also support responsible drinking. So as much as we enjoy some wine, we ask that you do so responsibly. I am going to do the same thing. I have got a Riesling this time. My uncles actually gave us the bottle, and it is quite delightful. It is much more of a dessert type of wine. Not as sweet as the Moscato in the sense that it's much more dry, but it's really delightful. And it's a 2014 Cold Creek Vineyard Chateau Ste. Michelle from Columbia Valley. So that is what I am drinking today. And goodness, cheers, everyone. And Dr. Vile, good luck.
Oh, great. I may need to trade places, trade drinks here.
Yeah, I would pass my glass to you if I could. Pour you a glass.
So I do not know. I probably should. Is there an early attempt on a president's life that I have forgotten? Certainly, Andrew Jackson was involved in a duel, and it seems to me that there may have been an attempt on his life, but I don't recall that. Lincoln, of course, was the first president who was assassinated, and the results were pretty disastrous in the sense that if anybody could have carried us through Reconstruction, it probably was Lincoln. Andrew Johnson Andrew Johnson wasn't even a member of the same party. He had been recruited sort of on a unity ticket, and basically he was still a racist Southerner. And so you can hear that, can't you? I'm sorry. I told the wife not to call me at this time, but apparently she's doing it anyway.
Completely fine. We're glad you have friends and family.
In any event, that was bad. Then Garfield, Garfield and McKinley were the next ones. I don't know that they particularly changed. Well, actually, Garfield's. See if I get this right. He was shot by someone who had been denied an office, who wanted an appointment, sort of an insane person. And his successor, Chester Arthur, if I recall, pushed for civil service reform, which was very important. McKinley's assassination elevated Theodore Roosevelt, who is a sort of a legendary American figure. John Kennedy's assassination was used as a sort of a lever by Johnson to, Kennedy had introduced civil rights legislation. We should do this in his honor. And then you had, Ford was the recipient of at least one or two attempts. One, remember, by Squeaky Fromm, sort of a nut.
I do not remember that.
Well, she was one of the followers of Manson, George Manson.
Okay.
And then, actually, let me go back to the most famous, I think, and Trump tried to riff on this a bit. The most unusual assassination attempt occurred at the Milwaukee Fairgrounds in 1912. Theodore Roosevelt, and it's similar in that you had an ex-president. He had passed the baton to William Howard Taft and then become disappointed. And so he had run against Taft, but didn't get the nomination, but ran as a progressive bull moose. And he was giving this speech, and he was shot basically through the chest, broke a rib or two.
Wow.
But passed through a folded up speech that he had. But he was bleeding. I mean, it was a fairly serious thing. And he proceeded to speak for almost an hour. That it's going to take more than a bullet to get this bull moose down. And these are the progressive policies that I stand for. And if you read the speech, the crowd will say, go to a hospital. And I said, well, I'll go to the hospital, but first I got to tell you about progressive taxation. Wow. And then we're going to talk about antitrust laws and all of this.
Wow.
It's just a phenomenal speech. And then, of course, Franklin Roosevelt, weeks before he was inaugurated, gave a speech from a convertible in Miami, and a nut shot toward him and killed the mayor of Chicago, a guy named Karnak, or Karnek, it may be. But anyway, and his last words were, I'm glad it was me and not you. And a lot of people, and this ties into the convention very well. There were a lot of people at the time, particularly evangelical Christians, who were not necessarily on board with Democrats at that time. But many evangelical Christians saw this as a sign that Franklin Roosevelt was God's anointed, and God must have a special task for him. And you see how Trump played on that. Now, the issue, of course, and I know this isn't a theological program, but does God give you his imprimatur, if you will, by having a 40-year career in politics and never being shot at, or having a 8 years in politics and having been shot at but missed? And I,
it's different. It's different
people.
Interpretations, right?
Well, it is. I mean, it's, if you think about it, I guess it seems providential. And that's the best part, by the way, of what otherwise I think was a very lackluster, downer speech. But the first 20 minutes of Trump's speech at the last night of the convention focused on what it was like. And he points out that he had one chart there. He rarely brings a chart. It was the only one he's bringing. And because he moved his head to see the chart, instead of hitting him, in the brain, it flipped an ear.
Which is absolutely incredible when you think of it.
For today.
All right, trivia.
What war was fought over an ear? What war was named after an ear?
Can we get one more hint?
Yes,
okay, it was between England and Spain.
Oh, no, I just look so dumb.
Okay.
I don't know.
There is a war. It has other names, one of which may be War of Spanish Succession. I'm not sure, but it's called the War of Jenkins' Ear, and it occurred when
that was never coming.
I don't remember that at all.
It occurred when a Spanish soldier cut off the ear of an English captain whose name was Jenkins, and that created a set of mutual recriminations that led to war.
And then
I'm
there's
a little off topic here.
Judas.
I'm never going to forget that.
I mean, talking about ears, there's
okay.
I thought Van Gogh.
That was self-inflicted. But one of the things that isn't one of the little disturbing things last night, and fortunately it didn't go on very long, but a couple people said, they went after him for his taxes. They prosecuted him for this, martyr. And then they tried to shoot him. Well, they didn't shoot him.
Right.
And I heard it, and this is not unique to me, but one of the news things that I was watching said, assassins, at least from the right, they tend to be either Proud Boys or Lost Boys. And I don't know a lot about the shooter, but he doesn't seem to be a Proud Boy. In other words, he doesn't seem to be someone who's a member of American Nazi Party or Ku Klux Klan or something like that. But he does seem like maybe he was somebody who was a little isolated, maybe a little bullied, maybe never fit in. And, it's one of these seemingly random acts of violence.
Right. At this point, it seems to be.
Right. It sounds as though if Biden had the rally there, he might have tried to shoot Biden too.
From the little bit that is coming out, it seems almost more personal to him, as almost like a school shooter of I'm going to be popular now. Everyone's going to remember me and remember my name by what I do.
Although now the one piece of evidence that's now disputed is some people were claiming that there had been a posting in which he said, I'm going to do my premiere. And the latest I saw on that is they're not sure that came from him. They think it may be somebody sort of trying to set the stage for it. But I mean, the good thing is, as far as we know, he had no identifiable political
affiliations.
He wasn't far right or far left.
He was a kid.
He was just lost or, demented, or I don't know what the proper term is for something like that. But, after we didn't mention Reagan.
Yeah, let's tie in Reagan.
Well, when Reagan was shot outside a motel in D.C., he did not realize actually the extent of his injury. He wasn't even sure he had been hit. He was hurt. He was fairly seriously hurt. Rushed him to the hospital, and this is classic. Now, I'll come back to it. So he's on the operating table. apparently, before he goes under, he takes his mask off and he says, "I sure hope you guys are Republicans." And the chief surgeon, and I don't know if he knew he was echoing something that Thomas Jefferson had said back in 1801, but he said, "Mr. President, today we're all Republicans." Meaning, and I think this has been true of Trump. I've heard stories of idiots who post things on the net, sorry they missed or something like that.
Yeah.
But I don't know anybody I mean, everybody I've talked to said, well, this is, we don't favor violence in politics.
Right. It's horrible.
President Biden was very clear about this. And I think, every responsible political leader that I know is. But I'm still not sure what I think of. And now, although Trump gave a good explanation, so when he gets back on his feet, as we know, he raises his fist 3 times into the air and says, "Fight, fight, fight."
Right.
I don't know how I would have reacted. And I mean, he says it's his way of letting he said the audience, some of them thought he had been killed. When I saw it as it happened. And when I first saw something hitting somebody's head, you do think, he's going to kill him. That's going to be it. But he said it's just but it does seem a little militant. I mean, it's by contrast. Let's see if it's Garfield or it's McKinley. When McKinley is shot out in Buffalo, New York, if I recall correctly.
Yes.
Getting onto a train or off a train, onto a train, I think. The person who shot him quite clearly was mentally disturbed. And first thing McKinley says is the crowd jumps on this guy, as you would imagine. And he says something like, "Don't hurt the man," or, and then it's very sad. He had a wife who was an invalid for most of her life. And he said, "When you talk to my wife, please ease this and, make sure there's somebody with there." And then when he died, right before he died, his last, I forget the song. They were playing a religious song in the background, and his last words were, basically, "It is God's will." It's fine. It's God's will. And that if you collect memorabilia from this area, plates and whatever often have this "It is God's way" printed on them.
So how do you think this attempt has changed, if at all, the race, the election for this year?
I was going to get to something a little bit different.
Sure.
Which this could have been a pivotal moment in terms of Trump. Now, so none of us know how we would react to something like this probably until it happens. But a lot of people were thinking this is a Damascus Road experience. The light comes from heaven, you're struck blind, you hear a voice, "Saul, Saul, why do you
persecuting me?
And you go from, opposing a group to being one of their primary spokespersons. And in the initial, and Trump himself, remember what he said, and now I don't believe him now. He said he tore up his speech. Well, what he changed is he did not make it a direct attack on Biden.
Right.
Except he made it more when he, and I like this, by the way, when he's, New York, now you lived there for a brief time, didn't you?
I did. Yes.
It must not have been during the Trump administration, because I don't recall you telling me that the streets were paved with gold. But apparently when he was in New York, the streets there were paved with gold. There was no crime. Everybody was employed and the like. But I say this somewhat amusingly to say this could have been a moment. And I think to some extent, the first 20 minutes did indicate, I realize I might not be here today. I'm grateful for life.
Absolutely.
And, you know,
It
and
seems
this
like he teared up at one point. Like
Pardon?
in the beginning of his speech, it almost seemed like he was tearing up. Like you could see the
Well, and the
emotion on
audience
his.
clearly was, you know.
Yeah.
I owe it to God. I'm grateful to God for saving my life.
And then we meandered a lot of places after
for
that
100
got
minutes.
off script, and then we're back to the immigrants or rapists and murderers and
from insane asylums. Yeah.
and I don't, you know, you can call it a come to Jesus moment or a Saul on the road to Damascus.
Blind, but now I see. Yeah.
It doesn't seem to have influenced at all his policies.
I
It doesn't seem to have softened, you know, what he plans to do as president.
Now, he did say, and I'm more inclined to give him credit for this, but I'd like to see what you both think. I think you both watched more of the speech than I did. I'm an old person. I get so tired.
I did not watch the whole thing, to be clear.
It was 100
I got about
minutes.
till 30 minutes in when we started meandering.
I had the advantage of being in the central time zone.
Yeah, it was really late for me, and I was already stressed out. And like, if I watch this, I'm going to be up till 4 a.m. because I'm so stressed out with all of the politics is really stressful for all of us, but especially in trying to do this show. But I did. It was hard. I give him credit for I don't want to be president or supportive of only half the country.
Right.
I want to be president of the whole country. It seemed very unifying, and I appreciated that part of it. It seemed like if there's a road to Damascus moment, it seems to be he's been less divisive in his words within the last week since the attempt has happened than he had been before. I am hoping that whatever happens from the assassination attempt, both sides start tempering language of divisiveness, of retribution, et cetera, so that there is more unification.
But on the other hand, you still had a lot of I'm being persecuted.
Yes.
You know, these are
he got himself worked up, I feel like. Because I think he started. He got himself worked up, just like a little kid who got really excited about something. And you're like, yeah, we got it, friend. You told us the same sentence 8 times in the past 2 months. Got it. We're tracking. So I think he tried to, I think his team desperately tried to get him to portray himself as a changed man. I think they told him that was the move.
Yeah.
And he was like, okay. And then he got up there and heard the crowd and was like, actually, I have things I want to say. Is what happened. Well, I don't believe it for a second that he's changed.
I jokingly talked about Kid Rock and Hulk Hogan and Dana White, but it was like an all boys night at a time where, you know, many people were saying if the Democrats, and of course they're ahead right now, I'm sorry, if Republicans are going to win, seem to be ahead right now, but that they need to appeal particularly to women suburban voters.
Yeah.
And maybe women's, you know, we'll have to ask, maybe Chelsea can tell us whether she, you know.
I mean, I like Kid Rock as much as the next
Hulk
girl.
Hogan and what is
You're
it?
a good country
Worldwide
fan.
Championship Wrestling, Ultimate Championship Wrestling, and Kid Rock.
That is who I want actually protecting my interest on a national convention stage. Those two people and only those two people is what I've always dreamed of.
I mean, maybe if we throw Chuck Norris in, I might feel better protected.
There we go. Yeah. I mean, if Kid Rock starts singing on stage, you might win me over, but I don't want to hear anything else personally.
Well, and I will say, and I do want to come back to you know, it sounds like the Republicans are more ahead now since the attempt, but since we're talking about the ticket and appealing to other voters, and I want to go back also to the constitutional ramifications as well as the political, but
what would have happened if
yes, he had chosen a different running mate?
Or I was going to ask what would have happened at this point, because I don't know the answer to this.
Okay, so let's do that. So there's
assuming Dr. Vile does.
Yes.
If he had not survived the attempted assassination,
what would have happened?
And my guess would be the Constitution does not address that because it doesn't really control how the parties do things. But what would the Republican convention have done at that point? We had not announced a VP. And
there wasn't even a VP.
What would have happened? I don't know. Do they call an emergency session?
Well, it would be up to the Democratic National Committee,
The Republican?
Republican, to choose it. Right. Now, if Trump were assassinated, if he were to be assassinated today, I think it's still up to the committee, but today it would be pretty clear
Vance.
that it would probably be Vance.
Wow.
But what if it had succeeded? What would happen? Who is put forward?
Well, he wasn't the official
question,
nominee.
I mean,
yet.
I think the first question, and it's never. Now, we had something similar back in 1864.
See, I knew you would know.
Right.
See,
I
The
knew
fact
it.
that
I
you
think.
know any of this is incredible.
Well, Horace Greeley had run for president, the editor of the
Of course,
New York-
Horace.
New York
Horace.
Times, or one of the papers there, and
How do
he
you know
died
everything?
between nomination and election.
Okay.
Or did he die between he may have died between election and inauguration. Yeah. In any event, he wasn't the candidate who won, so it didn't matter. But the Constitution, if the election has happened, then whoever's designated as vice president automatically owns that.
So
Otherwise,
they're
but what
November
I was going to
7th.
say is, would they have had this convention 2 days after a presidential, had he been assassinated? I don't know what they would have done.
Yeah.
I think it would have been so chaotic.
It's just one of those things that that has never happened. Is it just that they would do their best to go by the governing bylaws?
Yeah,
and
I mean, I
There's nothing in the actual Constitution for that, is there?
no, there isn't.
Okay.
Because really the only real, I don't know even there if you have the mention of it, but 12th Amendment is sort of the only official recognition of political parties. I mean, it's adopted because prior to that, you can have a Federalist president like John Adams and a Democratic Republican vice president.
Right.
Like
I think we should go
Thomas
back to that
Jefferson.
personally.
So now people run on a ticket.
Yeah.
But
I think we make them split the difference. Whoever wins gets president, whoever loses gets VP, and y'all can play nice. I think we should go back to it. I think it's a great idea.
Well,
A good example for Congress.
Can you imagine a Biden presidency and a Trump vice presidency, or vice versa?
I would, at this point, I've lived through so many unprecedented events. Let's
It
just
would work.
fully send it.
Try it.
Let's commit to the bit and really do it. I would love to see it personally.
Right.
And the comments in this video, I already know people are going to be so mad about it.
But-
I think it would be funny.
But this does relate. I mean, it relates then to another question that you raised, and we've probably already talked this to death. But should Biden step down because
Yes.
of his missteps and perception of his age? And we don't know for sure what would happen then. My preference would be, and I've written an article on this, would be that if he steps down, he should strongly throw his support to someone. Probably his vice president. I think it would look very bad to pass over a
Right.
woman and an African American.
And that's kind of what Nikki Haley has done, is she has delegates there, right? She has...
Well, no, this was Republican convention.
Right. No, I know. But it would be
Right.
similar in the sense that she's now telling her, is it delegates? Is that the
They
term?
released their delegates.
Yes,
yeah.
that she's releasing her delegates
Right.
not to vote for her and telling them to vote for Trump. So in the same way, I can see the Democratic convention coming up, and them saying, okay, well, we've got all these Biden delegates, but we're releasing you and we ask that you support X
Well,
candidate.
and if I'm understanding, technically, it's not like now presidential electors, states have laws that penalize them if they try to vote for somebody other than who they're elected for. This is not true of the nominating conventions. They're
just
not
kind of-
legally, as I understand it, bound, but
Yes.
they've run on a ticket that I'm going to vote for Biden Harris. So
Right.
Yeah.
that's what you would expect them to do. But what I think will be most interesting were Biden to step aside. And it can go both ways. I don't think he needs to step down as president unless
No.
things are even worse than they appear.
Agreed.
But I think the primary fear about Biden, and it ought to be a concern with Trump, to be very honest.
He's not that
It's
much
not-
younger.
No.
Well, right. It's not so much how capable they are today, how capable they're going to be 4 years and some months ahead.
Agreed.
And are they still going to be up to snuff then? But let's say that Biden steps aside and says, I'm recommending Harris, and gives her sort of some wind in her sail. Although the problem, of course, there is if Biden isn't popular, she's not very popular either.
Right.
But she would then have the option, I think, of either saying, if you vote for me, I will do what Trump did. I'll tell you on the first day or two of the convention. Or, and I think the last time this happened was in 1956, but I may be wrong. There has been a time or two where the contender opened up the convention to select the vice president.
Oh,
that would be mayhem.
Well, it'd be but in terms of viewing audience,
that would be exciting.
This is Hulk Hogan.
Forget Hulk Hogan and Kid Rock. This is even better.
And especially Democrats, right?
Yeah. I do think they're setting themselves up with his recent news that he's ill with COVID. I think they are setting him up to make a graceful exit from the presidential candidacy for a reason other than his mental capabilities. I think they're going to say he has long COVID or a different a physical complication with COVID and let him bow out.
It was sad to me if you saw him walking up the steps to the plane. He has COVID and he had a busy day, but he looked decrepit. Yeah. And that can happen to any of us, probably will if we live long.
Right.
So it's not something to be celebrated for sure.
No.
But I want to Reagan, I don't know if we said this. Reagan did got a bounce after his attempted assassination. And I think Trump's gotten one, in part because he did seem resilient.
Yes.
And
he seemed very strong.
Yeah, he did.
I think that's the thing, right? And it contrasts, just as you're saying, so significantly with it was a strong moment. The picture is iconic. It'll be in history books for years. It was, I think, something that, I don't like Trump, but I think it was a hell of a moment, right? Like, I think that was a moment. And then even if you had just your average president next to him, it would look strong. But instead we have Biden, what seemingly is one of the most weakened presidents as the comparison. It just makes that gap so much more apparent.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to circle back to the vice president pick. And then we definitely want to talk about Judge Cannon's decision. I think that's the biggest legal portion of the news outside of the Constitution and Constitutional Convention. Well, there's the original Constitutional Convention, but the party conventions that are happening. So we have J.D. Vance picked. I don't think many people are aware of him outside of the Hillbilly Elegy, which is his memoir. And it's been made into a movie through Netflix, which actually got panned. It didn't get great reviews. Glenn Close is in it. I do love Glenn Close. But now is apparently...
I'm so late on the uptake here. Why was it banned? Do we know? Why it was banned? I don't.
No, it was panned.
Sorry.
Banned.
I totally heard that wrong.
Yeah, no.
I was like, it was banned. What are we talking about?
No, it was panned is not a good movie.
Because of his grandmother's language. And he said this in the speech. His grandmother was known as someone who loved Jesus and the F word. And they're not things that you usually expect to link together.
Yeah. So Vance's pick, I want to talk about that, but as the suburban woman, suburban female, suburban wife, suburban mother, I will say it was not my favorite pick. And I think it could have been stronger. I know he couldn't pick Nikki Haley. I know.
I wanted him to, though.
But I think
Nikki Haley.
I like Nikki Haley. I don't agree. As with all of the candidates, I don't agree with all of their policies, all of their ideas.
That's not an endorsement, but that to me would have appealed to a broader audience.
I think so, too. And honestly, this sounds a little odd. But it would have been easier for me to accept Vance's wife on the ticket. as a candidate for
Yes.
VP.
Can we get a woman? Can we get a woman? At this point, I'm not too picky. Can we just get any woman?
Yes, Sarah Palin.
Okay, wait. Let me get that.
I knew I'd get you. Okay.
You got me there.
You had a
You got
chance.
me. I forgot about her.
I love that. Oh, I can't
think I
forget
buried
about
that
her.
so far in my I mean, I was a kid at the time, so it's like that. I try to bury that.
Oh, I was not a kid, and I will tell you, I went for Halloween that year as Sarah Palin.
Oh my God, no, you didn't.
I did.
I let you leave my house with that.
What year?
I don't
that was
remember that.
I was already living on my own and married in Alexandria, Virginia.
that was like 2000. What year was that?
Goodness, it was 2008,
12.
12.
Eight?
No, it was not 12. I think it was 8.
8.
McCain, I think.
But
yeah, it was 8.
Also,
Okay, that was 8.
I also went to Halloween as Ruth Bader Ginsburg once. So I
Love that.
really like strong female figures. And, independent female
Can we get
figures.
an Elle Woods, please? Can we get an Elle Woods?
I'm happy with that. But I think, and one of the interesting things that I've been tracking is these polls. God knows how realistic they are of who could beat Trump, right? If the Democrats were to have Biden step aside, who could they get? And the biggest one that keeps resonating and, resounding from the rafters is, well, Michelle Obama. And I've gone back. Dr. Val, I'm gonna bring us back to our founders and about our talk from last week, because I am at the point where, bless her, I understand you don't want to be put in a position that you don't want to do. She clearly doesn't want to be president. I respect her for that. There's all this, a movement of boundaries, keeping your boundaries, making sure other people don't tell you what you have to do. But honest to goodness, I would rather have a person in power who didn't want it, but who the nation needs and wants, than someone who is begging for it.
Yeah, but she's never held political office.
It doesn't matter.
Well, it does.
Neither had Trump.
Okay.
Well, according to these
neither had
polls,
Proves my point.
True. Right. And I'm not saying necessarily, for me, I would support her for a number of reasons, not related to the current talk. But the polls are suggesting that even though she hasn't had political office, that who she was and how she held herself and has treated her office, has treated, the office of presidency as first lady, how she's handled herself, the policies that she tried to implement while she was first lady, that she was a very activist woman during her husband's presidency.
And she's extremely intelligent and well-spoken. I really like her too for, again, reasons not even related to this conversation.
But remember, the strong negative about her is that early when Obama was elected, she said something to the effect that this was the first time in her life she had ever been proud of the United States.
That's true.
And people said, and you had the privilege of going to Princeton University, and this and that, and this is your first proud moment. How American are you?
Absolutely.
I think that would come. And again,
all of it would come out.
I had no idea that happened, so this is news to me. But
yeah, everything would come out. But in my mind, what's happening here is it needs to go back to George Washington, right? People elected him. He wanted to go back, as you've talked about, Dr. Vile, of go back to the plow. Let me go back to my farm.
Cincinnatus, yes.
And they said, no, we need you to be president.
So what you're looking for someone. Now, let's go back just a moment. Trump is the first person we want to qualify it a little. We've had people who were president who didn't have elected office.
Like Grant.
Right.
Eisenhower.
But we never had anyone prior to Trump who had neither elected office nor
military service.
And not just as military leadership.
Right.
So Eisenhower had never been, to my knowledge, in an elected office. But
he was
clearly,
a war hero.
Right. Well, and again, if you can invade Normandy, you can probably lead a country.
Right.
Let's find a female Marine. Let's get a female Marine on a ticket.
So if you could find, I can tell you somebody that you would be looking for, but he's gone. A Colin Powell.
Oh, sure.
Perhaps a Secretary Gates. I think he's a little too old for this now. But if you could find a figure like that, David Petraeus had he not marred his own reputation through an extramarital affair. But, if you could find a figure like that who was universally considered, like Washington, sort of above politics, had no burning desire to be president, but to take it. But I don't know anybody like that right now on the Republican or Democratic side. I mean, Jimmy Carter, he would be a good one. But I think you might have an age issue there.
Well, I mean, we've got an age issue
right
he
now.
might outlive them all.
Look, I'm in Georgia. It's about an hour and a half. I'll go drive, pick him up, and take him straight to DC. Let's go.
I think you would be very surprised.
I think so too. But going back, I mean, Vance is an interesting pick. I think he's very much a very big MAGA supporter. If he was looking for a Trumpite.
Now.
Right. And he did initially have very strong
never
critiques.
Trump. Until.
I would say that he kissed the foot, but I think he probably kissed a posterior in order to be elected as senator from Ohio.
Yeah.
And I think that, I think a lot of people wonder about it's nice to be flexible, but does he have are there principles behind this?
And you've met JD Vance.
I have. I've heard.
What did you think of his book?
Hillbilly Elegy. I've had second thoughts since, but I admired him here. We invited him to campus. He gave a good speech. He wasn't particularly easy to deal with in terms of the demands that he had and what he would do and what he wouldn't do in terms of, he liked giving the speech and signing the books, and that was about it. But, I guess the other alternatives were mostly governors.
Yeah.
Rubio. Vance was chosen. You just look at the electoral map. He was chosen because we got 4 or 5 major states, most in the Midwest,
swing states, yes,
that are in contention. Pennsylvania, not Midwest, but Pennsylvania, Ohio. Minnesota, Wisconsin, possibly Georgia, maybe North Carolina. But you have these swing states, and he is making an appeal, frankly, to
younger voters.
I was going to say lower class, but let's say working class, white males in particular.
And younger voters. He's 39.
That's what I'm saying. That to me is his only good thing. He's young. Like, he graduated law school in 2010. Like, he's young.
Yeah.
That's about where
he's got energy. He's young. He could last a while in politics. He has a long career ahead of him.
Right.
In that way, I think it was a very smart pick.
I think
it doesn't appeal to me personally. I was hoping for someone else, but and
he looks like Trump's children, right?
He does.
He looks
and
like
he's
his boys.
a friend of his boys, at least
one of them. I didn't
think
about that. That's so funny.
And he's close, right? He is, and he's here's the contradiction. He's seeking to understand and explain the white working class,
right?
But his own job is in working for a billionaire,
right?
Right. Yeah,
and is a very educated man. Yeah,
right.
Right. I don't know. He went to Yale, but we won't hold that against him.
You do not want to get me started
Dr.
on
you
Yale.
were on fire today.
Okay, so John Kennedy's line is the best on this. You know that. I think we've discussed it, right?
Remind us.
So he gives a speech at Yale, and he says who gives him an honorary degree, and he says he has the best of both worlds. He has a Harvard education and a Yale degree, or something.
Nice.
To that.
It's so shady. I love it.
Does that make up for the other?
No. Unfortunately, no. But I do think and to be fair, I don't follow Republican senators, that closely until we get into places like this. And I'm like, oh God, I have to, deep dive. But he has a pretty big, reach, I feel like, on social media. Like, I feel like I've seen clips of him on podcasts being interviewed. So I absolutely think like the younger, like I knew who he was, and I have not,
generation.
I don't follow Republican politics that closely. And
he's younger than me.
Yeah,
he's a
39.
millennial.
But
Yeah.
let me give one thing that's a little ironic here.
Okay.
Republicans were very critical of Obama when he first went for president.
Because he was so
Why?
young and new.
Young and
He had been
inexperienced.
2 years in the Senate, very little, he'd done some community work and maybe even state legislature, but really was wet behind the ears. And we got something similar here.
Yeah.
And, again,
Vice president versus president, though, is,
right.
A little.
Well, president, but
little more
vice
experience.
president, I mean, as we can see, vice presidents can, they're chosen as vice president because they're supposed to be able to step in the presidency at a moment's notice.
Exactly.
That's their primary, they're a president in waiting. It's an important job in that respect.
Okay, so let's shift over to Judge Cannon's decision. And for a brief recap for everyone, Trump's had 4 criminal cases ongoing in this last year. We have the New York, essentially, fraud trial going on. He was recently convicted on 34 counts, felony counts of falsification of business records, etc. There's been the Georgia case, which is another state-led case and prosecution related to election interference. That has been put on hold indefinitely based on issues with the prosecutor and ethical considerations surrounding her and her continued prosecution in this case. There is the D.C. federal case involving election interference and essentially defrauding the American public.
And that has been somewhat affected.
Correct. It is still ongoing, but the timelines are indefinite at this point. And going back to the New York one, for which he was recently convicted, the sentencing has been postponed since the presidential immunity case came out. So there is now a review of those convictions in light of the new decision regarding what a president can do and what is considered an official act of a president versus a non-official act that he can be prosecuted for.
Could we use the term king maybe instead of president here? Would that be closer to the truth?
I believe so. According to the most recent decision about presidential immunity that came out of the Supreme Court. And I want to call out some of our viewers and listeners who have been incredible in making some great comments. I appreciate them all of you who are listening and commenting and supporting and following and liking our page. And I appreciate that you're staying civil and respectful. And I appreciate the comments, especially on the one where it was called, did we just make the president a king, regarding the presidential immunity case by the Supreme Court. And we got 2 really interesting comments. One was by someone from Norway, who was saying, love your friend from, your friends from Norway. And it was essentially, that's not actually even what you're saying has been granted is not even within the authority of an actual king. Within their governments,
of course,
as
modern
they know
kings
it.
Are basically titular, figureheads.
Right. And I think that was the implication. And then another commenter suggested more of a dictator or dictatorship versus a kingship. So it's hard to put a word on, we've suggested, did we make the president king? I think Justice Sotomayor raised that question, but there's, I think, a justifiable question of, did we make the presidency, not Trump, not Biden, the presidency, whoever is in it, did we make that office much more dictatorial, authoritarian in nature than democratic in nature? And
That's the concern. It's not, a good president, you probably don't have to worry about whether they have immunity or not.
Right. And that's the idea I think the founders, it was, not comprehensible to them that a president would want to engage in criminal acts. And I do wonder, and I don't think we fully discussed this before, but with this decision for presidential immunity, that the decision basically was the president has immunity for all official acts. And included in those acts, we got some specifics. We really did. Now, the amorphous, we're going to send it back to the courts to deal with this and figure it out, is the question of running as a candidate, presidential candidacy, and how much of the election is an official act versus an unofficial act of a president. And right now, we're not going to get to it because that case where the privileged, presidential immunity was really brought up was the Florida case. Yeah. The Florida federal case for classified documents is what is a president allowed to do and what is he immune from suit for? And now it's criminal prosecution.
Well,
and Judge Cannon just tossed out the case. So I don't know that we're going to have a case right now that decides official versus unofficial acts and defines them.
To stop there a minute, the Florida case was most of it took place, if not all of it, took place after he was president. Correct. So it's not clear to me the degree to which the Supreme Court decision would have come in. Now, what she has done, and we always like to throw in some Latin, right?
Absolutely, throw it in. Okay. Let's learn some things.
So we want to throw in the distinction between obiter dicta, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but ratio descendendi. Does that sound right?
Sounds right. Go for it. Better pronunciation than I could do.
Okay.
Same.
So what has happened in the Florida case is she has said that Jack Smith's position is unconstitutional, that he was
as an appointment
improperly appointed. Right. And this is based on interpretation of Article 2, which is the article in the Constitution that deals with the presidency. And then Section 2 deals with different powers that the president has. And one of them is he shall nominate, by and with the advice and consent of the Senate, I'll shorten here a little bit, ambassadors, public ministers, Supreme Court justices, other officers of the United States whose appointment are not accounted for. But Congress may by law vest the appointment of such inferior officers as they think proper in the president alone, in the courts of law, or in heads of departments. And so she has, although we have a Supreme Court decision, Morrison versus Olson, which had upheld the constitutionality over a strong dissent, by the way, from Justice Scalia, had upheld the constitutionality of the so-called special prosecutor rule. When that law lapsed, Congress adopted in its stead a special counsel rule, which is largely designed for cases where one might question the partiality or impartiality of the Justice Department. So it looks bad, and this is what Trump is accusing Biden. Trump is saying,
you're using the DOJ to come after me.
He's saying all these prosecutions are coordinated by the federal government, which is headed by a Democrat. They're all out to get me and persecute me. And to get around that, Congress has authorized, and we have had a series of special counsels who were appointed.
Ken Starr with Clinton?
Pardon?
Ken Starr with Clinton and Lewinsky? Was it with the prior rule?
I think his was actually the last special prosecutor. But then we had prosecution. We've had several since. Nobody is basically questioned. But what Cannon claims, and I'm going to use a term, and I'm not trying to offend Catholics, but Jesuitical, you're familiar with that? The Jesuits were known for parsing scriptures and laws and regulations. And in early America, which was 90% Protestant, the worst thing you could say about someone was they were Jesuitical. They were just cutting fine line. This is the most Jesuitical decision in that respect that I have ever read.
Of picking and choosing the laws.
And basically what she does, okay, now let's go to the Latin. she says, yes, the Supreme Court in the past has accepted prosecutions under the special counsel law, but nobody really raised it until now. And when I look at it, because Jack Smith was not previously confirmed by the Senate as a U.S. attorney, the president had no right to appoint him without Senate confirmation. Now, she does not, by the way, and the news is getting this wrong. Some of them have said she's dismissed the case because she didn't find any crime. She
That is
says,
incorrect.
I'm not deciding whether he's guilty or innocent. I'm simply saying that the person who's prosecuting. Now, one of the things
That it
that's
wasn't
ironic,
properly brought procedurally.
right, is that she says she does throw in her 2 cents. This guy has cost us $10 million. The investigation is proceeding very slowly. He's been there for a year and a half. Well, about a year of the delays have been her own.
She agreed to the continuance, says.
But, basically she's using this appointment clause to say that she's throwing the case out. I think, well.
Do you know either of you whether it was dismissed with or without prejudice?
Oh,
I believe it's without.
It's not that kind of case. She's ruling only on the legal.
I know, but it's still dismissed, and it has to be legally. It has to be with or without prejudice.
Without prejudice, but
I don't think it falls in that category. But I could be wrong.
All of them have to. It has to be one or the other, as Chelsea's indicating. Is if it's dismissed without prejudice, there's the ability to refile.
No, but it just says the superseding indictment is dismissed. It doesn't say with or without prejudice.
Then the implication legally is that it's without.
Well,
that's the implication. Okay. Is if it's
I know that it's already been appealed, or Smith has said he's going to appeal it.
It's been formally appealed.
Now, what's fascinating? Okay, so we didn't still get. I gave throughout the legal terms and I didn't explain them, right?
Right.
So obiter dicta. Okay, when the court makes a decision, the ratio descendendi, or however it's pronounced, is what is the specific legal issue that the court has decided in this case. Mm-hmm. For example, the president does have immunity in this case. He doesn't have immunity in that. Now, in the process of writing opinions, Supreme Court justices say a lot.
Yes.
And none of them say much as Aileen Cannon does. There's more obiter dicta in her decision than practically any decision I have ever read. And
that's why her and Justice Thomas are besties.
Okay.
That is they are besties.
Okay. So she says that these decisions never explicitly dealt with address the ratio descendendi. They were simply what they said in passing about the special prosecutor is obiter dicta. It's just something
it's
that they said.
It's not an official holding. It's just something they wrote.
What does she rely on in part? She relies on Justice Thomas's concurring opinion,
which is dicta,
which he says in U.S. versus or Trump versus U.S. U.S. versus Trump.
No, Trump.
That I called his journal
Trump
pages.
Versus U.S. Okay. He says in a concurring opinion,
yes.
By the way, in addition to presidential immunity, I think we ought to look at the special counsel rule,
which was
so unrelated to the issue that the court was asked.
It was not there,
different.
But she relies on obiter dicta to say, I think these other decisions were based on obiter dicta.
Yeah.
And see, here's the decision that came out 3 weeks ago that supports it magically.
Exactly. But it's not a full decision because it was a singular concurring decision.
It's a concurring opinion by one justice.
Exactly.
I don't think
he wasn't joined by
what it does is kick it down the road, right? Like we have now kicked it again, and we're going to appeal all of these cases, I'm assuming, up to the Supreme Court just for fun, because it doesn't matter who loses at the appeals level. They're going to appeal it again.
They have to.
And this is absurd. Like this makes me so mad. This is absurd.
So let's take this to the election a minute. Mm-hmm. Democrats are fairly unlucky when it comes to Supreme Court decisions or Supreme Court appointments. So Trump, now, okay, in my judgment, I did not, and I've been consistent on this. I thought the Republicans did wrong in not giving Merrick Garland his day before here. When Obama in his last year or year and a half nominated him, I thought he should. And in fact, I would favor a rule, probably constitutional, that says when you have an appointment, you have a year, you have 6 months, and if you don't come up with a conclusion one way or the other, the president gets the nomination, or however it'd probably be more sophisticated than that. But not only did Trump get one early in his administration, then at the end of the administration, with less than a year to go, when Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, they rushed through a third one. And it turns out I very much like the third one. She's Amy Coney.
She's been more independent than I thought she would be.
She's far more independent, and I think has a great judicial career ahead of her here. But he got 3 appointments in a single 4-year term.
Yeah.
Biden has been president. I think he got cheated out of one, but he ended up with only one. Poor Jimmy Carter. 77 to 81, got not a single appointment to the U.S. Supreme Court when he was president. But the appointment, I mean, you just think now most of the decisions right now. No, I shouldn't say most. Many of the more controversial decisions have been 6-3.
Correct, which is conservative versus Democrat.
Right. Almost every 2 to 3 years, a president gets a nomination. So the future president will likely get 1 or 2 appointments, and it will make a difference.
Yes.
And, particularly on cases like presidential power, like what is the authority? We've talked about the Chevron rule and the Lopez
federal agencies, abortion.
Right. What is the regulatory power there, and also just executive power, and particularly executive orders in general. How much leeway does and especially if you think about issues related to immigration, military spending, and the like. So this is going to be a consequential presidential election.
It absolutely will. And I think that's important to mention is in voting, you're not just voting for a president. You're voting for who the president will nominate. And that has often swayed my own vote for elected officials, especially with Supreme Court nominations of what type of judge do I want on the Supreme Court. And I think it's especially important right now to think of that, of who would be appointed to the Supreme Court, what ideologies are we putting forward. And it's also swaying our election issues this year as far as Biden's now coming up with, and I think it's appropriate for the Democrat Party to bring this up as well as the Republican Party, is court stacking. Right? We're now revisiting issues of, well, should we add more justices to the Supreme Court? Should we impose term limits? And let's go back to the Constitution. Dr. Weil, are there any term limits or are there any provisions in the Constitution regarding either of those issues? How many Supreme Court justices there are?
No. Okay.
No?
The Supreme Court, the Constitution, we've had from 6 to either
9.
12 or 13 justices.
Currently 9,
but we've had
right?
9 since about since Ulysses S. Grant, I believe. Maybe it's either 1865 or shortly thereafter. So well over 150 years now.
So it's more custom versus actual constitutional rule.
Right. It's almost like the customs and usages that we talk about in British law. Just remember, if you can add 5 members, 5 Republicans to the court, the Democrats can come back and add 10 Democrats.
Right.
I mean, that I don't see much. Now, should there be, if I were James Madison, I mean, the real James Madison, and I were writing the Constitution, right, not just one who plays one on TV and in front of groups. if I were James Madison and I could look back over 200 and some years of history and say, did we get this, judges and justices serve the constitutional term as during good behavior.
Right.
And that has been interpreted, I think, correctly as meaning you're there until you die, you retire, or you're impeached, convicted, and removed from office, which has never happened to a Supreme Court justice.
Right.
There's been one impeached, but never removed from office. I don't think you could impose, and I'm a little concerned that some people don't seem to know this. It seems like some of these legislators think that they can impose by law a term limit on Supreme Court justices, and I don't think it can be done.
But couldn't we adopt an amendment to do so?
Yeah, absolutely, right.
We'd have to amend the Constitution.
It can't be done.
Okay.
But now there's two approaches one could take. If I were to start over, I think it might be good to have a 16-year limit for Supreme Court justice.
Okay,
So
why 16 years?
A term versus an age limit.
Right. And well, that's another possibility. But if I were to start from scratch, I'd probably give them a 16-year limit. And then would it be every 2 years? Or maybe it's an 18 years. You do it so that every 2 years, one justice would be normally, now take a while, but you get to the point where every 2 years, so every president would essentially be guaranteed 2 nominees.
Interesting.
You wouldn't be as dependent on fate, who dies and who retires when. But I don't think you can do that short of an amendment. And I don't think you could put an age. A lot of states have like a 70-year-old limit.
Virginia, you have to step down when you're 70. It doesn't matter how fit, how intelligent, how wise you are, how many years of experience you can add to the bench. As soon as you turn 70, you're off.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's an argument to be made about people making decisions for a world they won't live in. I think there's an argument to be made there.
Yeah.
I don't know that I would put it at
Like
70.
if we don't want 21-year-olds making decisions, maybe we don't let 81-year-olds make decisions either. I think that's a fair compromise, right? Like I don't want a 21-year-old to be president, but I don't want an 81-year-old to be a Supreme Court justice either.
Yeah, I think I think there's one thing where we don't have term limits really for senators, for congressmen.
Or age limits there, and they
exactly. We've got Pelosi
often,
who is there, and
the Senate
Feinstein.
looks like a nursing home sometimes.
Exactly.
It's cheaper probably to support them in the Senate than to send them there.
Exactly. So a lot of things and issues coming up, and I will encourage. I've had a lot of discussions recently with friends who are saying, "Well, why vote? I'm in a state that's Democrat. It doesn't matter what I vote. I'm in a state that's Republican. It doesn't matter what I vote." And I encourage you all, please vote, because if we have so many people who say that same thing, then of course it will be the opposite. But if everyone exercises their vote, you can make a difference. But it has to be, it has to be everyone stepping up to take advantage of their opportunity. And I will say one of the regrets in my life as a political science major, as the daughter of Dr. Weil, I am ashamed to say that there was, of my entire life of voting, there was a presidential election I did not vote in. And I'm ashamed of that. And I tell myself, I used to tell myself it didn't matter. The state I was in, it didn't matter what I voted. It was going to go the one way, whether I voted for that or not. But if we continue to have that mindset, we continue to propagate this idea that it's only party-based and not individually based. And we did fight for so long for freedom in this country. We have fought so hard for African Americans to have votes, for women to have votes, because it does actually matter. And if you believe in something, go vote for it, whatever side you're on.
And if I can make a comment, I think the strongest argument against the Electoral College, and I can make some arguments for it, but the strongest argument against it is that it does depress voting in presidential elections.
Agreed.
And you're a better political scientist than I am, because I recently gave a speech to a Rotary Club, and I said, I hate to say this, but your vote in the presidential election in Tennessee really isn't going to matter. And I said, I know I'm not supposed to say it,
Right.
but I'm in a very red state. It's going to vote for the Republic. You know,
Exactly.
you,
And
you could
that's
run
what-
Hulk Hogan. In fact, he might even, he would win the presidency.
Right. And that's
I think
fine.
but that's another good point. That's what I tell people. You're right, whatever. I'm not going to argue about the president. What I care about is my local legislature, the people who are elected in my area, the people who are elected in my state,
Yep.
and you have to go vote to do that. So
Yep.
you're right. I'm like, that to me is way more important than what the president does. I'm way more
But
concerned about.
If you're like me, I know very little about my local representatives. And I say that with some shame. I mean,
I'm nosy.
I'm too
I'm in their
busy trying to
business.
save the country to worry about my own neighborhood. And that's bad.
It's my favorite
We
thing
ought
to
to be
do.
paying attention.
To be up in local government's business. It is so much fun. It is so interesting. I highly encourage everybody to get on the internet and look up your local people because it is fascinating. And I personally, as an internet sleuth, enjoy it. And then it makes me want to go out and vote even more.
Yeah.
Very good.
Well, please, everybody, do exercise your right. Use it. And yes, Dr. Vile, I agree. You know, my husband's of the same mind of, you know, we're in Maryland. Of course, it's going to be Democrat. Well, if everybody voted, maybe it wouldn't be. If we make that assumption and then those who are opposed, who are on the Republican side, then they don't go vote because, of course, it's going to be Democrat, then maybe there won't be a shift because we're presupposing the outcome. But don't presuppose the outcome. Go say what your voice is. Make your opinion heard. If there's ever election to step forward and do so, do it now, and especially for younger voters. I know that this is new to you. I know that this is something that is very concerning, I'd rather not even get involved. This is the time to get involved. This is your future. This is your future, your government. You're uniting or dividing. This is your choice. Make your choice, make your decision count. At least be able to say, I tried to make a change. I tried to have my voice heard. We have First Amendment freedoms, and the right to vote very much to me is a type of First Amendment freedom. It is free speech. Go exercise your right to choose who you want to be elected.
Okay. And if you're an immigrant and you have been naturalized, don't let anybody intimidate you from voting, because that's what's happening in Tennessee.
Tag me. I'll come with you. Tag
They're
me.
sending letters to naturalized citizens who voted, telling them you better have been a citizen or you're going to have a $10,000 fine. And it's just unconscionable.
How's that not legal?
We've fought so hard for so many centuries to have the right to vote. Don't let it slip away and give away your own individual power. I know it seems very disheartening, and I have felt that same way. But if there's ever a year to go vote, please go vote. If you have any questions, comments, please leave them. We will try to answer them. We're trying to stay on top of them better. We're trying to help. We appreciate your support, your listening. Like and subscribe and share, follow, so that you can get our program out to others who would be interested, especially in the legal and constitutional basis that we're trying to start and keep through all of our programming. If you know of someone studying for the bar, we've got 2 weeks left as the airing of this date, okay? So of this program, 2 weeks left. If you know of someone who is panicking for the bar and says, I just need a little bit more help on property or evidence or whatever it is, send them to our website. If you're looking for a little chuckle, go to the website and look at our merch. We've got some pretty funny sayings, and we're coming out with another. We're about to have a coffee mug saying, allegedly, this is coffee.
And for all our Swifties, we have In My Lawyer Era. Y'all, I'm so excited about that one. So excited.
Yes, I decided to go to law school today. We've got some funny ones out there. So
what, like it's hard?
Yeah, so go check it out. Get involved. Do something. And for other law schools, let us know if you're interested in us coming out. We are happy to show up to your law school, do a little promotion, do a little giveaway, as well as promote our products and get to know you all. We are interested in law students. We are interested in up-and-coming leaders of our country and our legal practice. We are very interested in education. We're happy to do so. Shoot us a line, leave us a comment. And we will catch you next time on the Legal Weekly Wine.